It was an exciting time to live in the state of South Carolina. Right around the turn of the century, the turn from the 19th to the 20th century brought us a brand new, very modern invention, the motor car. Nothing more exciting than taking a ride in a motor car. My grandpa told me about the first time he ever saw a motor car. He was born in 1897, 3 years before the new century. And so he was about 8 years old when he saw a motor car. He was out in his garden on the farm, hoeing onions, and a friend from a neighboring farm came running across the way yelling, "Sam, Sam, there's a motor car on the highway. Come on, first motor car to come through our county. Run, run, we can see it." My Grandpa Sam dropped his hoe, and he and a friend took off running across the cow pasture, jumping over fences, scrambling between strands of barbed wire, splashed through a creek. They ran all the way up to the big state highway, which in those days was just a dirt road. Before it had been a wagon trail. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and finally they saw the motor car coming. Here it came round the bend. That thing looked like a monster. You could see the dust flying out from behind it, and the man driving it was wearing a big long duster coat, and he had on big gauntlet gloves and great big steering wheel, and he was hanging on like he was holding on for dear life. And that thing was rattling and banging and making all kinds of noise, and my Grandpa Sam and his friend stood there and watched that thing go roaring by at 20 miles an hour. And then Grandpa Sam's friend turned to him and said, "You know what, Sam? They say if you go faster than 20 miles an hour, your head will explode." And they really believed that. They had no idea that just a few decades later, we would be driving race cars hundreds of miles an hour, and so far, nobody's head has ever exploded. A few days later, that car was coming back. It was a steam car called the Stanley Steamer. And Grandpa Sam's friend came running back and he said, "The car's on its way back. The automobile is coming. Come on, let's run to the state highway. We can see it 2 times. And so they dropped their tools and took off running again. They got up to the state highway and they waited and they waited and they waited. Seemed like the longest time. And then finally they saw the car coming back from the other direction, but it had broken down and it was being pulled by 2 big mules. They had hitched the mules to the front bumper, and they were pulling that old Stanley Steamer home just like you'd ride in a wagon. But cars would improve, and over the next few years, an inventor named Henry Ford would start to produce what Americans called the Model T, nicknamed the Tin Lizzie, a fine touring car. And when my grandpa grew up to be a young man, got married, he and my grandma had a Model T Ford, a Tin Lizzie, and he told me about driving it all over the place. Of course, he never would let Grandma drive. My grandpa was very traditional in that respect, and he'd say, "Women have no business voting for the president, and they have no business driving a motor car." And he never would let my grandma get behind the wheel. But then, one day my grandpa went to work with one of his friends, and they rode in his friend's motor car. And so that car was sitting out there in the yard in front of their house. And my grandma told me, she said, "I thought I could drive that thing. I'd watched Sam do it many a day. I thought, I'm going to show him something. I'm going to go to town in the motor car." So she got her purse and she went out there to the motor car. She went around to the front and cranked it up, climbed behind the wheel in the driver's seat. Now, the Model T was different than driving one of our motor cars. There were 3 pedals in the floor. The pedal on the left, when you pushed it down, your car would go forward kind of slow. And then when you let it up, your car would go forward a little bit faster. If you wanted to give it some gas, there was a throttle on the steering column. And then there was another pedal that you pressed when you wanted your car to go backward. And of course, the 3rd pedal was the brake. Well, my grandma said she thought she had it figured out, but she wasn't exactly sure which pedal was which. And sure enough, she mashed in the wrong pedal and the car shot backward and crashed right through the chicken coop. Chickens flying everywhere, feathers all over the seats of the car, chicken poo out on the big black hood. When Grandpa came home, oh, he was fit to be tied. He fussed at Grandma some. He said, "Now see there, look what you've done. You've made a wreck of this automobile, and if you get the right to vote, you'll make a wreck of this country." My grandpa had a lot to learn. He would tell me about the motor car, and sometimes I like to imagine that it's the turn of the century and I'm riding in my motor car. Why, in a motor car, you could see every region of the state. You could start in Charleston, right there along the coast, and you could leave the coastal plains and head right on up through the sand hills. From the sand hills, you could go into the Piedmont. In the Piedmont, you could head up to the Blue Ridge. Come on, let's go. Let's see the state of South Carolina in one of these newfangled motor cars. First, you have to get your duster on, big long coat. That keeps your clothes all clean. And then you have to put on some gauntlet gloves. That'll keep your hands clean, help you to grip the steering wheel. And then, of course, you need a hat. That'll keep your hair clean from all the dust. Ladies would tie their head up in a big kerchief. And then you've got to wear goggles. And you get all dressed up, crank up the car, and off you go. Probably wouldn't travel far before you'd come to the river. Well, the state hasn't built bridges across all the rivers in South Carolina, so you might have to ford the river and drive through shallow water. Or you might have to get on a ferry, and the ferryman will carry you across the river. You might pay him a nickel or so for his service, and then you go off on the highway on the other side. But if you made good time, if you left Charleston at dawn, first light of the day, and you didn't suffer a flat tire, then you'd be in the state capital, Columbia, 90 miles away by dark. Stay in a big fancy hotel, and then the next morning you'd get back in your motor car and take off again, right on through the sand hills, up into the Piedmont. Might stop in the Piedmont and have a picnic lunch. You'd always carry food with you because McDonald's hadn't been built yet. And then you could drive right on up to the Blue Ridge. Oh, and the sights in the Blue Ridge. Beautiful country there. Why, a motor car could go most any place, and you could see the whole state from your motor car. You could go from the coast to the Blue Ridge in 2 days. That same journey, when South Carolina was founded in 1670, would have taken you more than 20 days of travel with horse and wagon. South Carolina has come a long way since those first days, and we have the motor car to thank for it.